The morning she died, the birds outside our kitchen window kept singing like nothing had changed. I remember that. It was strange, really, how the world just carried on. The sun rose, the garbage truck rolled past, my coffee brewed, and the birds kept chirping, as if Evelyn Langston hadn't just slipped quietly out of my life after 41 years of marriage. She'd been gone only 3 days when I stopped opening the curtains. The living room grew dimmer by the hour, and the kitchen, once her domain, stayed untouched. I lived in the silence, wrapped in it like a coat I couldn't take off. I wasn't angry at the world. I just didn't feel like I belonged to it anymore. Evelyn had been the warm light of this house, the woman who kept spare socks by the front door for neighborhood kids who came over without them, who hand-wrote thank-you notes to cashiers at the grocery store, who somehow kept hydrangeas alive in the brutal Midwest summers. I couldn't touch any of it, not the fridge magnets, not her sewing basket, and especially not the backyard, the place she called her sanctuary, and I jokingly referred to as the jungle. I hadn't set foot back there in months. Evelyn used to spend hours digging, planting, pruning. I'd watch from the window sometimes, coffee in hand, smiling at how she talked to her rosebush like it was a stubborn grandchild. After her stroke, she couldn't garden anymore, but she never stopped talking about it. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the funeral, I found myself standing at the sliding door to the backyard, hand resting on the glass. I don't know what drew me there. Habit, maybe, or guilt. The overgrown lawn waved like a sea in the breeze. Weeds had overtaken the edges, but beyond that, something odd caught my eye. Rows of something, deliberate, intentional. Someone had planted a garden. I stepped outside for the first time in weeks. The air hit me like a memory. Warm earth, faint lilac, a distant barbecue from someone's yard 2 houses down. As I moved closer, I saw it wasn't random. The layout was precise. Sections had been dug in clean rectangles. Labels were staked in the soil, handwritten on faded popsicle sticks. First kiss, our first car, Sarah's birthday, the lemon tree you hated. I froze. Each plant, each little mound of sprouting green, was tied to a memory. Our memories. That night, I searched through Evelyn's things. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but I think some part of me was. In the bottom drawer of her nightstand, I found it, a spiral notebook labeled, "For Victor, when you're ready." Inside were pages of notes, detailed plans, planting dates, even the reason for each selection. Sunflowers for our road trip to Kansas in 1987, lily of the valley for our first home, peonies for the fight we had, and how you held my hand anyway. I sat in her old chair by the fireplace, holding that notebook like a sacred artifact. She had planted the garden a year before she passed, when her hands still worked, and her speech was still clear. She'd arranged it with care, like a farewell wrapped in soil and sunlight, and I had never even noticed. The next morning, I stood in the garden for over an hour. I didn't touch anything, just stood there, letting the breeze pass through my shirt, listening to the quiet rustle of new life. I didn't cry, not yet. But something shifted, something opened. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own house. I felt rooted. I didn't know it then, but that garden, the one I never helped build, never wanted, never understood, was about to bring people into my life I hadn't spoken to in years, children I'd never met, a neighborhood I had quietly drifted away from. It started with Evelyn's garden, but it wouldn't end there. The boy showed up on a Wednesday afternoon. It was one of those early spring days where the wind still held a bite, but the sun made promises it almost kept. I was kneeling near the back corner of the garden, staring at a tiny sprout that had started pushing up near the stick, labeled Sarah's birthday. I hadn't touched much, just cleared some of the weeds and read more from Evelyn's notebook. But something about that corner felt like a heartbeat returning to an old body. I wasn't doing anything really, just sitting with it. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, cautious ones. I turned and saw him. A kid, maybe 10 years old, standing just past the fence that separated our yard from the sidewalk. He had a lopsided backpack, messy hair, and a look like he was trying to decide whether to run or wave. We stared at each other a moment. Then he pointed. "Are those marigolds?" I blinked. "What? Those yellow flowers," he said, pointing again. "They look like the marigolds we planted at school last year." I turned toward the little yellow blooms near the path Evelyn had once made from bricks she scavenged from old construction sites. They were marigolds. She'd labeled them Victor's first day of teaching. "I guess they are," I said. He stepped closer, cautiously pushing open the side gate. "Is it okay if I look?" I was surprised by how quickly I said yes. He stepped inside like he was entering a museum, slow, wide-eyed, reverent. "I'm Liam," he said. "We live across the street. My mom says, you're the man with the sad eyes." I raised an eyebrow. "She said that." "Did she?" He nodded. "She didn't mean it mean. Just that you haven't come out much since your wife died." The air shifted between us. I looked down at the marigolds. "Well, she's not wrong." He squatted near the edge of the bed, careful not to touch anything. "This is really cool," he said. "Did you plant all this?" I opened my mouth to explain, to say no, to tell him it wasn't mine, that it had been planted by a woman with soft hands and a stronger spirit than I ever had, but something stopped me. "I'm just taking care of it now," I said. Liam smiled. "That's what my mom says I should do with my dog. She was Grandpa's before he passed. Now she's mine." Kind of. We were quiet a moment. Then he pointed again. "What's that one called?" I glanced at the label. "The lemon tree you hated." I chuckled. "That one's complicated." He laughed. "A real one from the belly." "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. "I like plants. I don't have a yard." I should have hesitated. Should have wondered what his mother might think. But instead I heard myself say, "Sure, bring gloves." The next day he showed up with gloves, a trowel and 2 packets of seeds, both labeled with large cartoon vegetables. One was carrots. The other was peas. "They're my favorite," he said, matter-of-factly. "And peas are easy." We did them in 2nd grade. That evening, after he'd gone home, I sat alone on the porch with Evelyn's notebook in my lap and something else blooming quietly in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in a while. Not grief. Not even peace. Just company. A week passed. Then 2. Every afternoon, around 4 p.m., Liam would appear at the side gate, a little dusty from school, sometimes with a snack tucked in his backpack, always with something to say about plants or weather, or how his teacher didn't understand that sunlight and math are not connected. And every afternoon we'd work in the garden. Not that I really knew what I was doing. I still fumbled with the hose settings and stared too long at fertilizer bags, like they were written in another language. But Liam didn't care. To him, I was Mr. Langston, the garden guy. Not the widower, not the man who hadn't answered his door in December. Just the guy with marigolds and compost. One afternoon, while Liam was watering his precious pea sprouts, I sat on the back steps and opened Evelyn's notebook again. Page after page was filled with her unmistakable cursive, firm, graceful, peppered with little hearts, where her lower cases dotted the margins. If he finds this, he'll probably roll his eyes. But that's okay. Tell him the hydrangeas need a trim in early May. Remind him not to overwater the succulents like last time. And for heaven's sake, make sure he remembers that sunflowers need space to turn. Then, on a page marked simply April, I saw something that stopped me. This garden isn't just for us. He's going to need someone. After I'm gone. Maybe a child, maybe a neighbor. The roots will pull them in, if I've planted them right. I sat still, the wind flipping the page with a gentle whisper, as if she knew, as if she'd somehow written this script and waited for us to live it. Later that day, after Liam left, I walked to the front yard to take the trash out. Mrs. Ramirez, who lived 2 houses down and always wore oversized sunglasses and smelled like gardenias, was standing on her porch with her watering can. She waved. I almost waved back out of habit. But then she called out, "It's good to see you outside again, Victor." I paused. She walked over slowly, careful on the gravel sidewalk. "We've all been watching that garden of yours. Looks like it's coming back to life." I smiled faintly. "It's not my doing. Evelyn planted it. I'm just catching up." She nodded like she understood something deeper. She always said that place had magic in it. Then she added, Liam told my grandson, he's helping you out. That's sweet. You know, Evelyn used to talk about wanting to do a community garden someday. Said we all needed something better than fences between us. I raised my brow. She never told me that. Mrs. Ramirez shrugged. Maybe she was waiting for the right season. Before she walked away, she pointed to her porch. I've got some extra tomato starts if you want them. They'll do well near your fence line. That night, I pulled an old box down from the attic, the one Evelyn used to keep her gardening magazines in. Inside, I found clippings, seed packets, even little notes she'd scribbled on napkins from restaurants. But at the very bottom, I found a folded piece of cardstock. It was titled Backyard Expansion Plan. Drawn in her hand, it outlined exactly what I saw now sprouting outside. Flowers on one side, vegetables on the other, and a tiny square marked for visitors. She hadn't just planted a garden, she'd built an invitation. The square was barely 5 feet wide, outlined with mismatched bricks and half-buried marbles Evelyn must have saved from some long-forgotten craft box. It sat on the far end of the garden, near the lilac bush she once called our unofficial mailbox, because neighborhood kids used to leave her thank you notes tucked under its petals. I hadn't noticed the square until I read the diagram in her notebook, and once I did, I couldn't stop seeing it. This quiet little patch of soil Evelyn had labeled for visitors. It made me think. I didn't know what she meant by visitors exactly. Kids like Liam? Old friends? Strangers? Or maybe it was just her way of saying leave room for the unexpected. That thought stuck with me all week. Liam, for his part, took to the idea like a general planning an invasion. So we let people plant whatever they want, he asked, his eyes practically glowing. Within reason, I said, already regretting the suggestion a little. He nodded solemnly, like he'd just signed a treaty. Then I want to plant snapdragons. They're fierce. They're flowers, he grinned. Fierce flowers. Word spread fast. Kids have a way of doing that. Better than any press release. The next afternoon, 2 girls from the end of the block showed up with a plastic grocery bag full of lavender cuttings. One of them, Mia, said her mom used to grow lavender before she passed and wanted to see if it would grow here. I can water it, she said quickly. If that's okay, I don't want it to die. I nodded. You can water all of it, if you like. That weekend, a family I barely knew, the Monroes, stopped by. Tasha Monroe, the mother, stood holding a small pot of mint, while her young son clutched a single yellow daisy, like it was made of glass. I hope we're not intruding, she said, glancing at the garden. You're not, I said. You're exactly who Evelyn was expecting. She looked puzzled. I handed her the garden plan, Evelyn's original drawing, and pointed to the square. Tasha read it, smiled. Then, unexpectedly, her eyes misted. She was something else, your wife. She still is, I said quietly. Out here, at least. Within days, the visitors' square became the heart of the garden. One child planted wildflowers for my grandpa, who can't walk anymore. An older man from 2 streets over added sunflowers in memory of his wife, who passed in the spring. Someone left a small painted rock that simply said, Hope. The garden changed, not in layout, but in feel. It was no longer Evelyn's secret goodbye to me. It was a living conversation, one planted with grief, but blooming in connection. And something else happened too. People started lingering. Neighbors who once waved from a distance now leaned on the fence, asking how Liam's peas were coming along. Teenagers walked slower as they passed, some stopping to snap photos of the marigolds. One even asked if she could interview me for a school project on intergenerational community spaces. I laughed at that. Then I said yes. It was strange, but peaceful. Every time I walked outside, I saw someone new, and someone remembered. Evelyn had built this space with memory in mind, but what she'd really planted was something stronger, belonging. It was the sound I noticed first. A soft tinkling, like glass laughter caught in a breeze. I hadn't heard it in years. Evelyn's wind chimes. She used to hang them from the back porch, just above the old wooden bench. They'd play their soft, random melody every time the wind swept through, and she'd close her eyes and say, There, that's how you know the world is still singing. After she passed, I took them down. I told myself it was because they were old and rusted, But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear to hear something so beautiful when my world had gone quiet. But a few days ago, I noticed Liam crouched near the side shed, fiddling with something. "What are you up to?" I asked. He stood, holding the tangled chimes like a prize. "Found these under the bench." "Are they yours?" I stared at them, dull metal and weather-worn wood, and for a moment I saw her hands again, threading string through each tube, smiling to herself. "Yeah," I said softly. "They were hers." Liam hesitated. "Can I fix them?" I nodded. He spent the afternoon polishing each chime, threading new fishing line through the holes, even repainting the small wooden clapper a soft sunflower yellow. When he was done, he stood on a stool and carefully hung them back where they belonged, right above the bench. And then we waited. The wind arrived just before sunset, a warm sweep from the west, gentle and playful. The chimes sang. I sat down slowly on the bench and closed my eyes. And there it was again, that delicate meandering music. It didn't hurt this time. It didn't sting. It felt like her. That evening, I stayed outside longer than usual. Liam had gone home. The garden was still, glowing faintly in the twilight. Then I heard the creak of the gate and saw Mrs. Ramirez approaching, carrying a folded lawn chair and a glass jar of what looked suspiciously like peach iced tea. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. "Not at all." She unfolded the chair next to the bench. "I brought tea. The kind Evelyn used to make." I chuckled. "She'd be thrilled. Said you were the only one who didn't oversugar it." Mrs. Ramirez smiled. "That's because she made me measure every time." We sat for a while, sipping and listening. "Do you hear that?" she said, nodding toward the wind chimes. "I do." She took a long breath. "You know, Victor, this garden, it's healing people. Not just you. We all needed something to bring us out of our houses." I looked at her. She was right. People were waving again, talking, offering zucchini from their harvest, and swapping recipes. The mail carrier lingered a few minutes longer, each day. The quiet, disconnected little neighborhood we'd all been quietly surviving in had started living again. And it all came back to this bench. These chimes. This garden. I looked up at the wind chimes and whispered, "Still singing." Ramirez didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded, because she heard it too. At first, it was just neighbors, the ones who knew Evelyn, the ones who remembered me before the quiet years. But soon, the garden began to stretch its reach beyond our little cul-de-sac. It started with a paper envelope, no name, no return address, just a plain white envelope, left gently on the garden gate, sealed with a piece of twine. Inside were 3 seed packets, lavender, forget-me-nots, and lemon balm, and a note written in tight, careful handwriting. "For the woman whose hands I never held, but whose peace I feel when I walk by." I kept that note in Evelyn's notebook, tucked between her pages on summer planting. A few days later, a woman I didn't recognize stopped at the gate while I was trimming the rosemary. She looked to be in her 50s, carried herself like someone who used to smile more than she does now. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, holding out a ceramic pot with delicate white flowers. "My son's in rehab." This was his. He used to grow things before everything went sideways. I didn't ask questions. I just took the pot and nodded toward the visitor's square. "Find a spot," I said. She knelt, planted the flowers, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she stood, wiped her hands and left. No goodbye, just a lightness in her steps that hadn't been there when she arrived. It kept happening. A teenager on a skateboard left a small basil plant with a hand-drawn tag that said, "For my grandma who made spaghetti every Sunday." A postal worker, who'd never spoken more than a hello in 5 years, asked if he could bring sunflowers from his late sister's windowsill garden. A young couple new to the neighborhood planted time with a note that read, "To start something new, you plant where roots already are." I told Liam one afternoon, as we dug out space near the path, "Your little garden project is getting out of hand." He laughed. "That's the point." The visitors' square began to overflow, so we expanded it. A new section, unofficially called the Circle, sprouted near the old elm tree. We didn't advertise. There were no signs, no banners or social media pages. But still, people came. Word of mouth, quiet footsteps, Hands carrying seeds, cuttings, potted memories. Some stayed and talked. Some knelt and left without a word. One man simply stood near the garden for 10 minutes, tears in his eyes, before walking away with nothing but an empty plastic tray where a sapling once sat. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was something sacred, a soft place for grief, for hope, for tribute. People don't always need answers, Evelyn once wrote in her notes. They just need somewhere to put the love that doesn't have a place anymore. I finally understood what she meant. That evening, I walked the garden at sunset. Wind chimes tinkled softly above the bench. The lavender from Mia's bag was blooming. Liam's peas had crept up their twine in perfect little curls. I knelt near the new circle and planted something Evelyn had left behind. A single wrapped bulb marked, "For later." Trust me, I didn't know what it would become, but I knew it belonged here, with everything else that grew when we stopped keeping our hearts behind fences. It started with a request. "Mr. Langston," Liam asked one afternoon while watering the herbs, "why don't you write about the garden?" I blinked. "Write what? Exactly?" He shrugged, tugging his gloves tighter. "I don't know. Stuff. What people plant. Who they were for. What you remember. Like a journal. We keep one in science class. It helps you see how things grow." That night, I pulled out a blank notebook, not Evelyn's. This one was mine. A thick, leather-bound thing she had given me on our 35th anniversary. I had never used it. The inscription inside the cover read, "For the words you never say out loud, E." The irony didn't hit me until I opened to the first page. I sat at the kitchen table under the soft hum of the ceiling fan and began to write. Not just about the plants, or the soil, or how the birds had finally nested in the feeder again, but about people. April 12th, Mia planted her mother's lavender today. She didn't talk much, but the way she smoothed the soil after made me think she was saying goodbye, or maybe hello. April 16th, the forget-me-nots bloomed today, the ones from the nameless envelope. I still don't know who sent them, but they show up in the sunlight like little pieces of sky. April 21st, Tasha brought her youngest daughter. She planted a row of pink tulips and called them hope petals. I don't think she meant to say it out loud, but I wrote it down anyway. Each entry became a quiet ritual, just as grounding as pruning or watering or sitting on the bench with a glass of tea. I didn't write every day, only when something shifted. Sometimes the shift was small, a new sprout, a quiet moment, a memory Evelyn's chimes stirred loose. Other times, it was a face, a whisper, a stranger with grief in their hands, and nowhere else to set it down. The notebook filled quickly. One evening, Liam saw it open beside my tea, and asked if he could read a page. I let him. He sat quietly, flipping pages, frowning in concentration the way Evelyn used to when trying to remember a recipe. Then he said, "This feels like talking to the garden." I smiled. Maybe that's what it is. Later that week, Tasha asked if I'd consider sharing excerpts, just a few pages. Something the community center could post near the garden. A story wall, she called it. I hesitated. It felt personal, like revealing something sacred. But Evelyn had always believed that stories, like gardens, were meant to be shared, and this one wasn't mine alone anymore. So I printed a few entries, added small notes about each flower's meaning, and pinned them to a wooden board beside the bench. Within days, new notes appeared. Handwritten memories, petal sketches, names, dates, quiet confessions folded into paper hearts. The wall became as alive as the garden itself. People weren't just planting things. They were leaving parts of themselves behind. And I was finally finding the voice Evelyn had always said I had. Not in speeches, not in teaching, but in the quiet language of soil and ink. It had been nearly 7 months since Evelyn passed. 7 months of sorting through silence, of rediscovering life through clippings, sprigs, laughter, and dirt, of seeing our backyard, once a private patch of memory, become something more, something living, something shared. But nothing, in all that time, had prepared me for the moment I heard her voice again. Not in a dream, not in my head. For real. It was late afternoon, just before dusk, and I was alone in the garden. Liam had gone to his cousin's birthday. Tasha had taken the kids to a library event. Even the wind chimes were still. I was kneeling near the original marigolds, the ones she labeled Victor's first day of teaching. Their color had faded into a soft orange, petals curling gently, like they were bowing out. I reached into the soil to check the roots, and that's when I saw it, a small cassette recorder. The kind we used back in the 90s, hidden under the stone rabbit statue Evelyn had kept near the herbs, wrapped in plastic, labeled in her handwriting, "Play this in the garden. Alone, please." My fingers trembled. I took it inside, dusted off the old tape deck from our closet, and held my breath as I pressed play. Then I heard her. "Victor, if you're listening to this, it means you finally made it back outside." I froze. Her voice was faint, a little shaky, but it was hers. Clear, familiar. Home. "I didn't want to leave you behind, but I knew you'd stop talking once I was gone. So I figured I'd start the conversation for you." She laughed softly on the tape. "I hadn't realized how much I missed that sound. This garden, it's yours now. It always was, even when you said you didn't have the hands for it. But this time, Victor, I planted it with people in mind. I planted it for you to not be alone." I covered my mouth, tears already streaking down my cheeks. "There's going to be a boy, probably more than one. A woman or two, maybe even a grumpy neighbor who finds herself smiling again. Let them in, Vic. Let them root around in your grief until something good grows." A pause, then softer. "And when you're ready, when the wind sings and you hear those chimes without falling apart, I want you to sit on the bench and just breathe. Because you made it, my love. You're still here. And the world is too." The tape clicked off. I sat there for a long time, holding the old recorder in my lap, like it was a newborn. Outside, the sun dipped just below the horizon, casting golden light through the garden. I walked back out. The wind picked up as I reached the bench. The chimes began to sing, and I sat down, as she asked me to, and finally, for the first time since she left, I let myself breathe. Not just for me, but for her, for Liam, for every single person who had planted a seed in that soil and found hope blooming where they least expected it. She had given me her voice again, so I could use mine. It happened by accident. Liam had been playing with the latch earlier that afternoon, trying to fix the squeak using a paperclip and way too much confidence. I told him he'd only make it worse. He proved me right. When I walked out the next morning, coffee in hand, the garden gate stood wide open. For a second, panic flared in my chest. This space had always felt like a sacred circle, something you entered deliberately, not wandered into. Leaving it open felt vulnerable, exposed, like our little world might be overrun. But nothing bad had happened. No trampling feet, no disrespect. Just a faint breeze rolling in through the opening, making the wind chimes murmur like a welcome. I almost closed it out of habit. Almost. But I paused and left it. By noon, two strangers had wandered in. A young man with a guitar strapped to his back said he'd heard about the memory garden from his cousin, who planted mint for her dad. He didn't speak much. Just circled the path once, knelt briefly near the lavender, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he stood, nodded toward me, and walked out. The second visitor was a woman, maybe late 30s. She wore running shoes and had a toddler on her hip. She paused by the community notes board and read silently for several minutes before writing something down on a scrap of paper and pinning it up. After she left, I read it. This garden reminded me that not everything has to be fast. Sometimes healing is slow, and that's okay. That evening, Liam came by and noticed the gate still open. "You forgot to close it," he said, halfway through watering the snapdragons. "I didn't forget," I replied. He stopped, grinned. "You're finally letting the world in, huh?" "Your fault," I said, sipping my tea. He puffed up proudly. "Glad I broke the latch then." Over the next week, more strangers passed through. A pair of elderly sisters, a woman with paint-stained hands, a teenager with headphones who sat on the bench and just existed there for a while. Nobody asked to change anything. Nobody disrespected the space. They simply came, stood among the memories, and let themselves feel. And we kept adding. Tasha organized a community bloom day, where people brought cuttings and seeds from their childhood homes. Mrs. Ramirez painted new signs with the flower names and their meanings. Liam recruited 2 of his classmates to help build a tiny stone path around the outer circle. And I opened a second notebook. This one wasn't for stories. It was for names. Every visitor who wanted to be remembered added theirs, not in a guest book sort of way, but like planting roots in paper. A record of who passed through this once-forgotten backyard and left something of themselves behind. The garden had grown beyond its borders. It had spilled into lives, touched strangers, whispered something that Evelyn had always known, but I had taken too long to hear. When you leave the gate open, the world doesn't ruin the garden. It helps it bloom. It had been exactly 1 year. 1 year since Evelyn passed. 1 year since I found the notebook. 1 year since I stepped into a garden I hadn't planted and watched it change everything. The garden wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a living memory. The visitors' square had grown into 2 full plots now. The original bench was joined by 3 more. The notes board had to be expanded twice. Someone even donated a weatherproof case to protect letters from rain. And the gate, it stayed open. Always. That morning, I sat on the bench with a fresh cup of coffee in hand. The wind chimes danced above me in the early spring breeze, that same soft clink Evelyn loved so much. The tulips were blooming. The peas had returned. I opened the second notebook, the one with the names. It had over 300 entries now. First names, initials, anonymous tributes. Some were scrawled in crayon, some written with shaking hands, some in languages I didn't recognize. All of them belonged. Liam sat beside me, older somehow though only a year had passed. He had a little more confidence in his step, a little less bounce but more depth in his eyes. I think Evelyn would have liked this, he said, staring at the visitors' circle, now ringed with sunflowers. I smiled. She would have loved it. He leaned back on the bench. Do you think places can remember people? I looked around. The chimes, the sprigs of rosemary by the compost pile, the painted rock that read, "Hope lives here," the way new blooms kept rising, even in unexpected corners. Yes, I said, I do. Later that afternoon, we held the first ever planting day celebration. Tasha had organized it. Mrs. Ramirez made lemonade. A local artist painted names in watercolor for those who brought new tributes. And I read an excerpt from Evelyn's notebook. Her words, spoken now not to me alone, but to a gathering of faces she never knew, and yet somehow always included. What we plant with love grows in others, even when we're gone. There were tears, but there was more laughter. When dusk fell, and everyone had gone, I stayed behind to walk the garden one last time. I passed the hydrangeas, the mint, the roses near the fence that Liam still claimed, smelled like confidence. And then I reached the lilac bush, our old mailbox. There, tucked gently in the branches, was a new note, folded in blue paper. No name. I opened it. I came here lost. I'm leaving with roots. I folded the note, placed it into Evelyn's original journal, and sat down on the bench. As the wind chimes sang above me, I whispered, "You were right, Evelyn. This garden didn't just remember us. It helped the world remember itself."